The desert sky had been clear only moments before Wyatt Morgan felt the first drops of rain, but she knew better than to trust the weather in Southern California's high country, especially in the summer of 1883. She urged her mare faster along the narrow canyon trail, her heart hammering as she saw the wall of brown water bearing down from the mountains above San Bernardino. The flash flood roared like a freight train, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would die here, alone. Her dreams of reaching her sister's ranch reduced to nothing more than another nameless grave in the wilderness. The water hit her horse's legs first, and the animal screamed, rearing up and throwing Wyatt from the saddle. She plunged into the churning torrent, her lungs burning as she fought to reach the surface. The current dragged her along like a rag doll, slamming her into rocks and debris. She managed one gasping breath before going under again, her vision darkening at the edges when suddenly strong hands gripped her arm and yanked her upward. "I have got you," a deep voice shouted over the roar of the water. "Hold on to me." Wyatt clung to her rescuer, barely conscious, as he hauled them both toward higher ground. She felt the scrape of rock beneath her boots, and then they were climbing, scrambling up the canyon wall as the flood raged below. Her fingers bled from gripping the stone, but the stranger never let go of her, his arm like iron around her waist as he pulled them both to safety. They collapsed on a flat outcropping 20 feet above the muddy water, both gasping for air. Wyatt coughed violently, expelling water from her lungs, her whole body shaking from cold and shock. When she could finally focus, she turned to look at the man who had saved her life. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin, and hair the color of wet sand plastered to his forehead. His gray eyes studied her with concern, and despite the circumstances, Wyatt found herself noting the strong line of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders beneath his soaked shirt. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, though his gear was now scattered somewhere in the flood below. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice rough from exertion. Wyatt shook her head, then reconsidered. "Bruised, scraped, but alive thanks to you." She pushed wet hair from her face with trembling fingers. "I am Wyatt Morgan." "Jackson Mills," he replied, sitting up slowly and surveying the raging water below. "Your horse?" "Gone," Wyatt whispered, fresh tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Everything I owned was in those saddlebags." Jackson nodded grimly. "Mine too. We are stuck here until the water goes down." "Could be hours." As if to punctuate his words, thunder rolled across the canyon. The rain intensified and Jackson looked around their small refuge. A slight overhang in the rock face offered minimal shelter and he gestured toward it. Better than nothing. They huddled together under the overhang as the storm unleashed its full fury. Wyatt tried to stop shivering, but her wet clothes clung to her skin, and despite the summer heat, she felt ice cold. Jackson noticed and after a moment's hesitation, moved closer, sharing his body heat. "Where were you headed?" he asked, clearly trying to distract her from their predicament. "My sister's ranch, about 10 miles east of San Bernardino," Wyatt said through chattering teeth. "She married a rancher last year. I was coming from Missouri to help her. She is expecting her first child." "Long journey," Jackson observed. "Yes, and you?" He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the rain. "Nowhere in particular. I have been drifting since my parents died 3 years back. Lost our ranch in Texas to debts and drought. I have been working cattle drives, odd jobs, whatever pays. Heard there might be work in the valley." Something in his voice made Wyatt look at him more closely. Despite his capable appearance, there was a hollowness in his eyes, an emptiness that spoke of a man going through the motions of living without any real purpose. She knew that look. She had seen it in the mirror often enough after her own parents had succumbed to fever 2 winters ago. "I am sorry about your parents," she said softly. Jackson shrugged, but the gesture seemed forced. "Life goes on, or so people keep telling me." "Does it?" Wyatt asked. "Sometimes I wonder if I am just existing, not really living. Everything that mattered died with my mother and father. My sister is the only family I have left, and I have not seen her in over a year." Jackson turned to meet her eyes, and for a moment something passed between them, a recognition of shared grief and loneliness. "You are 20, maybe 21, he guessed. 22, Wyatt corrected. "You?" 27. "And yes, I know what you mean about just existing. Most days, I cannot remember why I bother getting up. I work because I need to eat, ride because I need to get somewhere, but there is nothing I am moving toward, just away from what I lost." The raw honesty in his words struck Wyatt deeply. Here was a stranger who understood the hollow ache that had consumed her for 2 years. "That is exactly it," she breathed. "Everyone expects you to move on, to heal, but how can you when the future you planned disappeared? You were close to your parents, very. My father taught me to ride, to read, to think for myself. My mother showed me how to be strong without losing kindness. They had such hopes for me and my sister." Wyatt's voice cracked. "Now Pearl is starting her own family, building something new, and I am happy for her, truly, but I feel lost. I have no idea who I am supposed to be without them." Jackson nodded slowly. "My father and I were going to expand the ranch. We had plans for a new herd, better breeding stock. He taught me everything about ranching, and I was good at it. When we lost it all, I lost my purpose along with it. I have been trying to find that feeling again, that sense of working toward something that matters, but nothing sticks." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. Wyatt found herself grateful for Jackson's presence, not just because he had saved her life, but because he understood. With him, she did not have to pretend to be fine or force a smile she did not feel. "How did you see me?" she asked eventually. "In all that water and chaos." Jackson's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I was riding the high trail when I saw the storm coming. I know these mountains well enough to recognize the danger, so I was heading for higher ground when I spotted you below. When the flood hit, I saw your horse rear up and throw you. I did not think, just moved. You risked your life for a stranger. Seemed like the right thing to do." He paused. "Only worthwhile thing I have done in a long time, if I am being honest." Wyatt studied his profile, noting the weariness etched into his features. This was a man who had given up on finding joy or meaning in his life, who simply existed day to day without hope. It saddened her more than she could explain, especially because she recognized the same emptiness in herself. The rain began to ease after another hour, and the floodwaters started to recede, though the canyon floor remained a muddy mess littered with debris. Jackson stood and offered Wyatt his hand, pulling her to her feet. She swayed slightly, dizzy from the ordeal, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "We should start walking before dark," he said. "San Bernardino is probably our best bet. About 8 miles southwest if we cut through the hills." "I have no money," Wyatt admitted. "Everything was in my saddlebags, my train ticket, the little bit of cash I had left." "I had about $20 in my pocket," Jackson said, checking to make sure the coins were still there. "It will get us a meal and maybe a room for the night. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." They began the slow, difficult descent from their refuge. Jackson went first, testing each foothold before allowing Wyatt to follow, always keeping himself between her and the longest falls. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the canyon floor, and by then, the sun was beginning to set, painting the wet rocks in shades of gold and amber. Walking through the muddy canyon in wet clothes proved exhausting. Wyatt's legs trembled with fatigue, and several times she stumbled, only to have Jackson catch her. He never complained about the slow pace, simply adjusted his stride to match hers and kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. "Tell me about your sister," he said as they walked. "What is she like?" Wyatt smiled despite her exhaustion. "Pearl is wonderful. She is 2 years older than me, always been the practical one. When our parents died, she held everything together while I fell apart. She met her husband, Samuel Martin, when he came through Missouri buying cattle. He convinced her to take a chance on California, on building something new. I admired her courage. She sounds like a strong woman." "She is. She wrote that the ranch is thriving, that California has been good to them. I think she wants the same for me, a fresh start, a reason to hope again." Wyatt glanced at Jackson. "Do you think that is possible, starting over when everything inside you feels broken?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have been trying for 3 years without much success, but maybe it is different for you. You have family waiting, people who care. That has to count for something. What about you? Do you have anyone?" "No. I had a younger brother, but he went east to study law. We exchange letters sometimes, but he has his own life. I am on my own, and I guess I prefer it that way." "Easier than disappointing people." "How could you disappoint anyone?" Wyatt asked, genuinely puzzled. "You saved my life today. You have been nothing but kind and capable." Jackson shrugged uncomfortably. "I could not save my parents' ranch. Could not keep the one thing they spent their lives building. My father died knowing he was leaving nothing behind but debts. That was not your fault. You cannot control drought or economic collapse. Knowing that and feeling it are different things." Wyatt understood that all too well. How many times had people told her it was not her fault her parents had died? That she could not have prevented their illness? The logic did nothing to ease the guilt and grief. Full darkness had fallen by the time they finally saw the lights of San Bernardino in the distance. The town sat in the valley below, a scattering of buildings and streets that represented civilization, safety, and rest. Wyatt had never been so grateful to see lamplight in her life. They stumbled into town just after 8 in the evening, two bedraggled, mud-covered figures that drew concerned stares from the few people still on the streets. Jackson led them directly to a modest hotel near the town center. The clerk behind the desk, a portly man with spectacles, looked them over with obvious disapproval. "We run a respectable establishment," he said firmly. "We were caught in the flash flood up in the canyon," Jackson explained, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Lost our horses and all our gear. We just need a place to stay for the night." The clerk's expression softened slightly. "Heard about that flood. You are lucky to be alive. That will be $2 for 2 rooms." Jackson hesitated, clearly calculating their limited funds. "Do you have 1 room available? We can manage with 1. Wyatt felt her cheeks warm at the implication, but she was too tired to care much about propriety. They had survived a flash flood together. Sharing a room seemed the least of their concerns. The clerk frowned. "I am not sure that is appropriate unless you are married." "We will be by morning," Jackson said without missing a beat, his hand finding Wyatt's. "The flood delayed our plans, but we are engaged." Wyatt stared at him in shock, but Jackson squeezed her hand gently, a silent plea to go along with the deception. She understood. A single room would preserve their meager funds, and his quick thinking might be the difference between eating tomorrow or going hungry. "Congratulations," the clerk said, though he still looked skeptical. $1 for the night. There is a bathhouse next door if you want to clean up. 25 cents for hot water." Jackson counted out the money, and they accepted the room key with profound relief. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, and little else. They stood in awkward silence for a moment after the door closed. "I am sorry," Jackson said quickly. "I should have asked before telling that lie. I just thought—" "No, you were right," Wyatt interrupted. "We need to conserve what little money we have. I do not mind. After everything we have been through today, I trust you." Jackson looked relieved. "I will sleep on the floor, you take the bed. We can figure that out after we get clean. I feel like I am wearing half the canyon." They took turns at the bathhouse next door, Wyatt going first while Jackson waited in the hotel lobby. The hot water was heaven, washing away the mud and fear of the day. Wyatt scrubbed her hair 3 times before it finally felt clean. Her dress was ruined, but the bathhouse attendant, a kind older woman, provided her with a simple cotton nightdress to wear while her clothes dried. When she returned to the room, Jackson took his turn. Wyatt sat on the edge of the bed, brushing out her wet hair and trying to process everything that had happened. This morning, she had been a stranger to Jackson Mills. Now they had shared near death, deepest fears, and were pretending to be engaged. Life moved strangely sometimes. Jackson returned looking considerably more human, his hair wet and slicked back, wearing clean trousers and a borrowed shirt. He had a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw and bruises darkening on his arms, but his gray eyes were clearer than before. "Feel better?" Wyatt asked. "Much. Though I am starting to feel every bruise from today." He gestured to the bed. "Please rest. I can make do with the floor." Wyatt looked at the hard wooden boards and then at the bed, which was barely large enough for one person, let alone 2. "Jackson, we are both exhausted and injured. That floor will leave you in agony by morning. The bed is small, but we can manage if we are both sensible adults about it." Jackson hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and exhaustion. Finally, he nodded. "If you are sure." They settled on opposite edges of the narrow bed, backs to each other, maintaining as much distance as the small space allowed. Wyatt pulled the thin blanket over herself, acutely aware of Jackson's presence just inches away. She could hear his breathing, slow and steady, and found it oddly comforting. "Jackson," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for saving my life today, for everything." "You are welcome, Wyatt." Silence fell, but sleep eluded her. Her mind kept replaying the flood, the terror of being swept away, the strength in Jackson's hands as he pulled her to safety. She thought about his words earlier, about drifting without purpose, and wondered what series of misfortunes had brought such a capable, decent man to such a low point. "I cannot sleep either," Jackson said quietly. Wyatt rolled over to face his back. "I keep seeing the water." He turned as well, and in the dim light from the window they faced each other like children sharing secrets at a sleepover. "It will fade," he promised. "The fear. I have had a few close calls over the years. The immediate terror passes. But not the emptiness." His expression grew somber. "No, that seems to be more stubborn." Wyatt found herself wanting to ease that emptiness, to bring some light back into his eyes. The impulse surprised her. She barely knew this man, yet she felt connected to him in a way she could not quite explain. Shared trauma, perhaps, or simply recognition of a kindred spirit. "What did you love about ranching?" she asked. "Before you lost it all." Jackson's eyes grew distant, remembering. "Everything. I loved the rhythm of it, the seasons, the work. I loved watching calves grow into strong cattle, loved the satisfaction of fixing a fence line or breaking a difficult horse. I loved working alongside my father, knowing we were building something together, something that would last." His voice roughened. "I loved having a purpose, a place in the world." "You could do it again," Wyatt suggested gently. "Start over, build a new ranch." He shook his head. "Takes money I do not have, and even if I did, I am not sure I have the heart for it anymore. Losing it once nearly broke me. I cannot face that possibility again." So you would rather drift forever. At least drifting cannot disappoint anyone. Wyatt reached out, surprising them both, and touched his hand where it rested on the pillow between them. You are not a disappointment, Jackson Mills. You saved a stranger's life today, asked nothing in return, and have been nothing but honorable in difficult circumstances. That speaks to who you are. Jackson stared at their hands, his calloused fingers slowly curling around hers. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you understand loss and loneliness. I know you are kind and brave. The rest can be learned in time. In time, Jackson echoed, a faint note of hope coloring his words. Wyatt blushed, suddenly aware of how forward she sounded. I mean, if we are to maintain this fiction of being engaged, at least until I reach my sister's ranch, we should probably get to know each other better. Is that the only reason? Jackson asked softly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I do not know, Wyatt admitted honestly. Today has been extraordinary in every way. I feel like the flood washed away some barrier I had built around myself. For the first time in 2 years, I feel something other than grief and emptiness. That terrifies me, but it also gives me hope. Jackson moved slightly closer, his eyes searching hers. I feel it too. I have been numb for so long, and then suddenly you are there, fighting the flood, clinging to life with such determination. When I pulled you out of that water, I felt something shift inside me. Like maybe there was a reason I ended up on that trail today at that exact moment. Fate, Wyatt whispered, maybe, or maybe just luck. Either way, I am grateful. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, faces close, two lost souls finding unexpected comfort in each other. When morning light filtered through the window, Wyatt woke to find herself curled against Jackson's chest, his arm draped protectively over her. She should have felt embarrassed or awkward, but instead, she felt safe and warm and more rested than she had in years. Jackson stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw their position, he started to pull away, but Wyatt stopped him with a hand on his chest. Do not, she said softly. Not yet, he relaxed, studying her face in the early light. Good morning. Good morning. Wyatt smiled, and it felt genuine, not the forced expression she had worn for the past 2 years. We should probably discuss our plan for today. Jackson nodded reluctantly, clearly as unwilling as she was to break the peaceful moment. Your sister's ranch. We should get you there. Samuel Martin, you said. Yes. I have the address in my bag, which is at the bottom of a canyon somewhere. Wyatt sighed. But Pearl wrote that the ranch is about 10 miles east of town, near a place called Waterman Canyon. I should be able to find it if I ask around. We will find it together, Jackson corrected. I am not leaving you to wander alone. You do not have to do that. You have your own plans, work to find. Jackson sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair. Wyatt, I have been drifting for 3 years without any real destination. One more day helping you reach your sister will not change anything, except maybe I will feel like I finished what I started yesterday when I pulled you from that flood. Wyatt sat up as well, the blanket pooling around her waist. And after? What will you do? I do not know. Maybe see if your brother-in-law needs a ranch hand. Maybe move on to the next town. I have learned not to plan too far ahead. The thought of Jackson simply disappearing from her life after delivering her safely to Pearl's ranch created an unexpected ache in Wyatt's chest. They had known each other less than a day, yet the idea of never seeing him again felt wrong somehow, as if the universe had brought them together for more than just the flood rescue. Stay, she heard herself say. At least for a few days. Pearl and Samuel have a big ranch. I am sure they could use good help, and you said yourself you know ranching. It would give you time to figure out your next move, and I would like the chance to know you better. Jackson looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Are you sure about that? Getting to know me better. Yes, Wyatt said firmly. Yesterday, in that canyon, I told you things I have not shared with anyone. You understood in a way others have not. I think maybe we are meant to help each other, to find our way back to living instead of just existing. A slow smile spread across Jackson's face, the first real smile Wyatt had seen from him, and it transformed his entire appearance. His eyes warmed and the lines of weariness softened. I would like that. Very much. They dressed in their now dry clothes, which were still stained with mud despite the bathhouse attendant's best efforts. Jackson counted their remaining money, $18.50, enough for breakfast and the journey to the ranch, with a little left over. They ate at a small restaurant near the hotel, both ravenous after the previous day's ordeal. Over coffee and eggs, they talked more easily than before, sharing stories from their childhoods, favorite memories of their parents, dreams they had once held. I wanted to teach, Wyatt confessed. Before my parents died, I was planning to attend a teaching college. I loved reading, learning, and I thought I could help other children discover that same joy. What stopped you? Jackson asked, though he probably already knew the answer. Everything fell apart after they died. Pearl and I had to sell the family home to pay debts. There was no money for college, and honestly, I could not imagine facing that future without them. The dream felt hollow. It does not have to stay that way, Jackson pointed out. You are still young. Once you are settled in California, you could pursue teaching again. Wyatt considered this. The idea still hurt, but less than it once had. Maybe that was progress. What about you? If you could do anything, money and fear aside, what would it be? Jackson did not hesitate. I would have a ranch again. Not huge, but mine. Good land, good water, cattle and horses. I would build it right, sustainable and profitable. Maybe a family someday if I found the right person. He looked at her meaningfully. Someone who understood the life, who wanted to build something together. Their eyes met across the table and Wyatt felt her heart skip. Was he suggesting what she thought he was suggesting? It seemed impossibly fast, yet at the same time, perfectly natural. They had faced death together, shared their deepest wounds, and found in each other something both had thought lost forever. Before either could speak further, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they saw several riders gathered around a telegraph office, talking animatedly. Jackson stood and walked to the door, Wyatt following. "What is happening?" he asked a passing man. "Another flood last night further up the canyon," the man replied. "Wiped out a mining camp. They are organizing a rescue party." Jackson and Wyatt exchanged glances. They knew firsthand how devastating those floods could be. "We should help," Wyatt said. "You just survived one flood yourself," Jackson protested. "You need to rest to reach your sister." "And you taught me that helping others is worthwhile, even when nothing else seems to be," Wyatt countered. "We know what those survivors are facing. We can help." Jackson studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but we stay safe. No unnecessary risks." They joined the rescue party, which consisted of about a dozen men from town along with a doctor and his assistant. The group rode out within the hour, Jackson and Wyatt riding double on a borrowed horse, her arms wrapped around his waist as they climbed back into the hills. The mining camp was a scene of devastation. Several structures had been completely destroyed, others damaged. Miraculously, most of the miners had reached high ground in time, but 3 men were injured and 1 was missing. Wyatt helped the doctor tend to the injured while Jackson joined the search for the missing miner. She cleaned wounds, offered water and comfort, and found that the work gave her a sense of purpose she had not felt in a long time. These people needed help, and she could provide it. The realization was both humbling and empowering. Jackson returned near sunset with the missing miner, who had been trapped under debris but was alive. The man's leg was broken, but the doctor believed he would recover. As the rescue party prepared to head back to San Bernardino, the mining camp foreman approached Jackson and Wyatt. "You two were caught in yesterday's flood, I hear," he said. "Yet you came back to help us today. That takes real character." "We know what it is like," Jackson replied simply. "We were fortunate to survive. Seemed right to help others do the same." The foreman pressed several bills into Jackson's hand. "The mining company wants to show its appreciation. This is not much, but it is honest thanks." Jackson tried to refuse, but the foreman insisted. When they finally looked at the money, it totaled $50, a small fortune. Wyatt felt tears spring to her eyes. With this, Jackson could afford proper supplies, maybe even start saving toward that ranch dream. They rode back to San Bernardino as the stars emerged, Wyatt leaning against Jackson's back, bone-tired but deeply satisfied. They had helped people today, made a real difference. It felt good, felt meaningful in a way nothing had for a long time. "Thank you," Jackson said quietly as they rode. "For what?" "For suggesting we help. I have been so focused on my own emptiness that I forgot how good it feels to matter to someone, even strangers." "You matter to me," Wyatt said, her arms tightening around him. "You have mattered since you pulled me from that flood." Jackson's hand found hers where it rested on his stomach, squeezing gently. "You matter to me too, Wyatt Morgan, more than I expected anyone to matter again." They reached San Bernardino late that evening, returned the borrowed horse with thanks, and found a different hotel for the night. This time, when the clerk asked about their relationship, Jackson looked at Wyatt with a question in his eyes. She nodded, her decision made. "We are engaged," Jackson said firmly, and this time it did not feel like a lie. In their room that night, they sat together on the bed, hands linked, talking about the future in a way neither had dared in years. Jackson spoke about the kind of ranch he wanted to build, and Wyatt shared her thoughts about teaching, about maybe starting a small school on ranch land. Their dreams began to weave together, two separate threads creating a stronger whole. "Is this happening too fast?" Wyatt asked at one point, voicing the concern that had been lurking in the back of her mind. "We have known each other less than 2 days." Jackson considered this seriously. "In some ways, yes. We have much to learn about each other, about how we handle daily life, disagreements, challenges. But in other ways, I feel like I have known you much longer. You understand me, Wyatt. You see the broken parts and do not look away. That is rare." "I feel the same," Wyatt admitted. "With you, I do not have to pretend to be fine. I can just be myself, grief and hope all mixed together, and you accept it." "So what do we do?" Jackson asked. "Continue to your sister's ranch tomorrow and see what develops? Or acknowledge that something real is happening between us and commit to exploring it?" Wyatt took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I vote for the second option. I think the flood brought us together for a reason. I want to see where this leads, to build something meaningful together." "If you want that too." Jackson's answer was to cup her face gently in his hands and kiss her. It was tender and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they parted, both were smiling. "I want that very much," he said. "I want to court you properly, to earn your trust and affection. I want to meet your sister and brother-in-law to prove I am worthy of you. And eventually, if you will have me, I want to marry you for real." Wyatt laughed, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring after a long drought. "I think I would like that too. But you are right. We should take our time, do this properly. I want Pearl to know you, to see what I see." They made plans as they prepared for bed. Tomorrow they would set out for the Martin Ranch. Jackson would seek work there, prove himself as a capable ranch hand and a good man. They would court each other properly, give their feelings time to deepen and mature. And when the time was right, if they both still felt as they did now, they would marry and build their future together. That night, they slept curled together, no longer strangers but partners in healing, two wounded souls beginning to mend. Wyatt dreamed of a ranch with a small schoolhouse, of children learning their letters while cattle grazed nearby, of Jackson's arms around her as they watched the sunset from their porch. The dreams did not hurt anymore. They felt possible. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. They purchased supplies for the journey with part of the mining company's reward money, and Jackson bought a sturdy horse that could carry them both comfortably. By mid-morning, they were heading east out of San Bernardino toward Waterman Canyon. The landscape was beautiful in the aftermath of the storm, everything washed clean and green. They rode slowly, talking and laughing, learning each other's preferences and quirks. Wyatt discovered that Jackson had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable, and that he loved astronomy, often sleeping outside to watch the stars. Jackson learned that Wyatt could recite poetry from memory, that she had a gift for languages, and that she sang softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. They stopped for lunch beside a creek, letting the horse drink while they shared bread and cheese from their supplies. Wyatt waded into the shallow water, lifting her skirts to keep them dry, and Jackson watched with obvious affection. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching his expression. "That I am a very fortunate man," he replied. "2 days ago I had nothing to live for. Today I have everything." Wyatt returned to his side, water dripping from her bare feet. "We saved each other, I think. You pulled me from the flood, but I am pulling you back to life. We are even." "More than even. You have given me hope again, Wyatt. That is no small thing." They reached the Martin Ranch in late afternoon, and Wyatt's heart swelled at the sight of it. The main house was sturdy and well-maintained, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see several ranch hands working near the barn. It spoke of prosperity and care, exactly what Pearl had described in her letters. Pearl herself emerged from the house as they rode up, her eyes widening in shock. "Wyatt! Oh my God, Wyatt!" She rushed forward, and Wyatt slid from the horse into her sister's embrace. "Pearl," Wyatt breathed, holding tight. "I am so glad to see you. You are early, and what happened to you? You look like you have been through a war." Pearl pulled back, examining Wyatt's still healing bruises. Then her gaze shifted to Jackson, sitting quietly on the horse. "And who is this?" "This is Jackson Mills," Wyatt said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "He saved my life 2 days ago when I got caught in a flash flood. We have been traveling together since." Pearl's expression shifted from concern to speculation, clearly reading something in Wyatt's tone and expression. "Saved your life." Jackson dismounted and removed his hat respectfully. "Miss Martin, it is a pleasure to meet you. Your sister has told me much about you." "It is Mrs. Martin now," Pearl corrected, but she smiled warmly. "And any friend of Wyatt's is welcome here. Please come inside. My husband, Samuel, will want to meet you both." The house was comfortable and welcoming, filled with the touches that marked it as a home rather than just a dwelling. Samuel Martin proved to be a tall, solid man in his early 30s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He listened intently as Wyatt recounted the flood and rescue, his expression growing increasingly impressed as he looked at Jackson. "You risked your life to save a stranger," Samuel said. "That speaks well of your character, Mr. Mills. Please call me Jackson." "And I only did what anyone would do." "No," Samuel disagreed. "Most people would have ridden on, kept themselves safe. You chose differently, and we are grateful. My wife's sister means everything to her." Pearl had been studying Wyatt throughout the conversation, and when the men stepped outside to see to Jackson's horse, she pulled Wyatt aside. All right, tell me everything. And I mean everything. You have been here 10 minutes and you have looked at that man at least a dozen times with an expression I have never seen on your face. Wyatt felt herself blush. Is it that obvious? To someone who knows you, absolutely. Wyatt, what is going on? You have known him 2 days. Wyatt sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. I know it sounds insane. 2 days ago I was alone and lost, barely living. Then the flood hit and Jackson pulled me out. We were stranded together, Pearl, and we talked. Really talked. He understands what I have been going through because he is going through the same thing. He lost his parents, his ranch, everything that gave his life meaning. We are both trying to find our way back. Pearl's expression softened. And you found each other instead. Yes. I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but being with him feels right. He makes me want to hope again, to believe in a future. We have decided to court properly, to take our time, but Pearl, I think I might love him. After 2 days. Pearl's tone was skeptical but not unkind. After facing death together, after sharing our deepest fears and wounds, after seeing his character in crisis. Yes, I think I might. Wyatt met her sister's eyes. I know you are worried. I know it seems reckless, but for the first time since mother and father died, I feel alive. That has to mean something. Pearl was quiet for a long moment, then reached out and took Wyatt's hands. I want you to be happy, you know that. If this Jackson makes you feel alive, then I am glad you found him. But I also want you to be safe and sure. So here is what we will do. He can stay here, work for Samuel. You can spend time together, get to know each other properly. If in a few months you still feel this way, I will give you my blessing. Wyatt hugged her sister gratefully. Thank you. That is all I ask. Jackson and Samuel returned, and Samuel made the offer before Wyatt could ask. Jackson, we could use a good hand around here, especially someone who knows cattle. If you are interested, the job is yours. Pay is fair, and you can stay in the bunkhouse with the other hands. Jackson glanced at Wyatt, who nodded encouragingly. I would be honored, sir. Thank you. Over dinner that evening, the conversation flowed easily. Samuel asked about Jackson's experience with ranching, and Jackson spoke knowledgeably about breeding, grazing rotation, and herd management. Samuel looked increasingly pleased, clearly recognizing Jackson's expertise. Pearl asked Wyatt about her journey from Missouri, and Wyatt shared the highlights while carefully omitting how close to death she had come in the flood. No need to worry her sister, especially in her condition. Pearl's pregnancy was just beginning to show, and she glowed with happiness. After dinner, Wyatt and Jackson walked outside, moving naturally toward each other in the gathering dusk. They stood close, not quite touching, looking out over the ranch land. Your sister seems nice, Jackson said. Protective but nice. She wants me to be happy, Wyatt replied. And safe. She suggested we take our time, really get to know each other while you work here. That is wise. I meant what I said last night, Wyatt. I want to court you properly to prove myself worthy. Working here will give me that chance. Wyatt took his hand, threading their fingers together. You have already proven yourself to me, Jackson, but I understand the wisdom of taking our time. We have both been through trauma. We need to make sure what we feel is not just shared grief or the intensity of surviving together. Jackson turned to face her, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. I know my own heart, Wyatt Morgan. What I feel for you is not just gratitude or circumstance. You have woken something inside me that I thought was dead. Whether we court for 3 months or 3 years, that will not change. Then we have nothing to fear from taking our time, Wyatt whispered. He kissed her gently, a promise of more to come before stepping back. I should let you rest. You have had a long journey and your sister will want time with you. Wyatt watched him walk toward the bunkhouse, her heart full. Pearl appeared at her elbow, following her gaze. He is handsome, she observed, and clearly smitten with you." "I am smitten with him too," Wyatt admitted. "Is that foolish? Maybe, maybe not. Time will tell." Pearl linked her arm through Wyatt's. "Come inside. Tell me everything, the parts you left out at dinner. I want to know exactly what happened in that canyon." They talked late into the night, Pearl in her rocking chair and Wyatt curled up on the sofa, just like old times. Wyatt told her everything, about the terror of the flood, Jackson's bravery, the rescue at the mining camp, the unexpected connection that had formed between them. Pearl listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. "You really do love him," Pearl said when Wyatt finished. "I think I do. Is that possible after such a short time?" "I fell in love with Samuel within a week of meeting him," Pearl confessed. "Sometimes you just know." But loving someone and building a life with them are different things. Love is the foundation, but you need compatibility, shared values, mutual respect. Those take time to establish. "We have time now," Wyatt said, "and I intend to use it well." The following weeks settled into a comfortable routine. Jackson proved himself an invaluable addition to the ranch, his expertise and work ethic earning Samuel's deep respect and the other ranch hands' friendship. He rose before dawn, worked hard all day, and still found time in the evenings to court Wyatt properly. They took walks together, talking about everything and nothing. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows. She read to him from her favorite books, introducing him to poetry and literature he had never encountered. They attended Sunday services in town together, enduring the curious stares and whispered questions about the handsome new ranch hand and Miss Morgan. Wyatt also began teaching, starting with the ranch hands who could not read. Word spread, and soon several children from neighboring ranches were coming twice a week for lessons. Jackson helped her convert an unused storage building into a small schoolhouse, and Wyatt felt her old dream rekindling. This was different from what she had originally planned, but no less meaningful. One evening, about 6 weeks after their arrival, Jackson and Wyatt sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. He had been quiet all day, and Wyatt sensed something weighing on his mind. "What is troubling you?" she asked softly. Jackson was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have been thinking about the future, about what I want and how to achieve it. Samuel has been generous, teaching me the business side of ranching, not just the labor. I have been saving every penny of my wages, adding to the money from the mining company. In another year, maybe 2, I could have enough to lease land and start my own small herd." "That is wonderful," Wyatt said, though she felt a pang of concern. "Would you leave then? Go elsewhere to start your ranch?" "That depends," Jackson said, turning to meet her eyes. "I need to know, Wyatt. Are we building towards something permanent, or are we just passing time together? Because if there is a future for us, I want to plan for it, include you in every decision. But if you are uncertain, I need to know that too." Wyatt took his hand, holding it firmly. "I love you, Jackson Mills. I have loved you since that first night in San Bernardino when you held my hand and understood my grief. I want a future with you, whatever that looks like." Relief and joy flooded Jackson's face. "I love you too. I have wanted to say it for weeks but was not sure if it was too soon. After everything we have been through, I do not think anything can be too soon for us." Wyatt smiled. "But I am glad we took this time anyway. Now I know you are not just a good man in a crisis, but in everyday life too. I have seen you with the other hands, with the animals, with my sister's ranch. You are patient and skilled and kind. Those are the things that matter in a partner." Jackson pulled her close, and they sat together as the stars emerged, talking quietly about their dreams. They would save money together, Jackson through his wages and Wyatt through her teaching. When they had enough, They would lease land near the Martin Ranch, start small but build steadily. Wyatt would continue teaching, maybe expand the school as more families settled in the area. They would work side by side, building not just a ranch but a life. "When should we marry?" Jackson asked. "I want to do this right, with your sister's blessing and a proper wedding." "Let us wait until spring," Wyatt suggested. "That will give us almost a year from when we met. It is enough time to satisfy anyone who doubts us, and it will give us more savings to start our life." "Spring it is," Jackson agreed, "but I want to make it official before then. Will you marry me, Wyatt Morgan? Will you take a chance on a former drifter who found his purpose in saving you?" Wyatt laughed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. But you are wrong about one thing, Jackson. I did not just give you purpose. You gave me life again. We saved each other." They told Pearl and Samuel that evening, and while Pearl initially suggested waiting even longer, Samuel overruled her. "I have watched Jackson these past weeks," he said. "He is a good man with a solid head on his shoulders. If they want to marry in spring, they have my blessing." Pearl finally relented, seeing the joy in Wyatt's face. "All right, spring it is. But we are doing this properly, with a real celebration. You are my only sister, Wyatt. I want to see you married right." The months passed quickly, filled with work and planning. Jackson continued to excel at the ranch, and Samuel began discussing the possibility of Jackson managing a new section of land Samuel was considering purchasing. Wyatt's school grew to include 12 regular students, and she loved every minute of it. They faced challenges, of course. There were days when old grief resurfaced, when Wyatt missed her parents so intensely it hurt to breathe, or when Jackson wrestled with memories of his lost ranch and the failures he still carried. But they faced these dark moments together, learning to comfort and support each other through the pain. Winter brought cold rains and hard work, but also cozy evenings by the fire, planning their future in detail. They chose land to lease, drew up plans for their house and outbuildings, calculated costs and timelines. Jackson taught Wyatt more about cattle and horses, while she introduced him to teaching, letting him help with the older boys who needed guidance in practical skills. By the time spring arrived, bringing warm sunshine and blooming wildflowers, they were both certain of their decision. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in April, giving everyone time to prepare. Pearl threw herself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm, determined to give Wyatt the celebration she deserved. She sewed a beautiful dress from cream-colored silk bought in San Bernardino, and organized a gathering that would include neighboring ranchers, the ranch hands, Wyatt's students and their families, and anyone else who wanted to attend. Jackson's brother traveled from the east for the occasion, and Wyatt was touched by the genuine affection between the siblings. David Mills was quieter than Jackson, more scholarly, but he clearly adored his older brother and was thrilled to see him happy again. The night before the wedding, Wyatt and Pearl sat together in Wyatt's room, just as they had so many times growing up. Pearl brushed out Wyatt's hair while they talked quietly. "Are you nervous?" Pearl asked. "Not about marrying Jackson," Wyatt replied. "I have never been more certain of anything. But I keep thinking about Mother and Father, wishing they could be here." Pearl's hand stilled in Wyatt's hair, and when Wyatt looked up, she saw tears in her sister's eyes. "I wish that too. They would have loved Jackson. Father would have appreciated his knowledge and work ethic. Mother would have seen how he looks at you with such devotion. They would have been happy for us both," Wyatt said. "You with Samuel and the baby coming, me with Jackson and my teaching. We are building good lives, Pearl, the kind they would have wanted for us." "They would be proud," Pearl agreed. She resumed brushing, her strokes gentle and soothing. "You know, when you first arrived, I was so worried. You looked so lost, so hollow. I was not sure California would be enough to heal you. Then Jackson appeared and I watched you come back to life. Whatever else happens, I will always be grateful to him for that. He was lost too, Wyatt reminded her. We found each other at exactly the right moment. Sometimes I think about how easily it could have gone differently. If he had been a mile further up the trail, if I had left Missouri a day earlier or later, if the flood had been stronger or weaker. So many variables that could have prevented us from meeting. But they did not, Pearl said firmly. You found each other, and that is what matters. Now you get to build a future together. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the California sky a brilliant blue. Wyatt dressed with Pearl's help, the silk gown fitting perfectly, and looked at herself in the mirror. She saw not the grief-stricken girl who had left Missouri, but a woman ready to embrace life and love again. The transformation still amazed her. The ceremony took place outside, with the ranch's beautiful landscape as a backdrop. Samuel had built an arbor decorated with wildflowers and greenery, and chairs were arranged in rows for the guests. Wyatt's students sat in the front, excited to see their teacher married. Jackson waited at the arbor with the minister, looking handsome in a new suit. His eyes never left Wyatt as Samuel walked her down the aisle, Pearl having insisted on the traditional touch. When Samuel placed Wyatt's hand in Jackson's, she saw tears glistening in her brother-in-law's eyes. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed her tenderly, and the gathering erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration lasted well into the evening with food, music, and dancing. Wyatt danced with Jackson, with Samuel, with each of her students, laughing more than she had in years. Jackson looked happier than she had ever seen him, the haunted emptiness completely gone from his eyes. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Jackson pulled Wyatt aside for a private moment. They stood at the edge of the gathering, his arms around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Incredibly," Wyatt replied. "You, more than I ever thought possible. A year ago I was drifting alone, seeing no purpose in anything. Now I have you, a future I am excited about, work that matters. You saved me, Wyatt. You truly did." Wyatt pulled back to look at him. "We saved each other, remember? You pulled me from the flood, but I was drowning in grief long before that water hit. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope, to dream. We are partners in survival and in life." Jackson kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips. "Partners in everything," he agreed. "Always." They returned to the celebration, but Wyatt's mind was already moving forward, imagining the life they would build together. The ranch they would establish, the children they might have, the students she would teach, the seasons they would face side by side. All of it felt possible now, exciting rather than overwhelming. Later that night, in the small cabin Samuel had prepared for them as a wedding gift, Wyatt and Jackson lay together, talking quietly about the day and the future. Through the window, they could see stars scattered across the dark sky, the same stars Jackson had loved watching since childhood. "Tell me about the stars," Wyatt requested, snuggling closer to him. Jackson pointed through the window, his voice low and soothing as he named constellations and shared the stories behind them. Wyatt listened, not really caring about the astronomical details but loving the sound of his voice, the warmth of his body against hers, the absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. "I love you," she whispered when he finished. "I love you too," Jackson replied, pulling her closer. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on us." "Best decision I ever made," Wyatt said. "Well, second best. The best was climbing on that horse with you in San Bernardino and deciding to see where the journey led. That journey is just beginning, Jackson reminded her. We have a whole lifetime ahead of us. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found healing and hope in the unlikeliest of circumstances. The flash flood that should have killed Wyatt had instead brought them together, washing away the barriers grief had built and clearing a path toward love and renewal. The first years of their marriage were filled with hard work and steady growth. They leased the land they had chosen, a beautiful section with good water and grazing. Jackson's skills and Samuel's guidance helped them build a modest but thriving cattle operation. Wyatt continued teaching, her school growing until she had 20 regular students and had to hire an assistant. Their first child, a son they named James, was born 2 years after the wedding. He had Jackson's gray eyes and Wyatt's dark hair, and from the moment he arrived, he owned their hearts completely. Wyatt marveled at the joy she felt watching Jackson with their baby, seeing the tenderness and devotion he showed. Pearl's children, first a daughter and then twin boys, became James's closest companions as they grew. The two families remained close, sharing Sunday dinners and holidays, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating successes together. 3 years after James came a daughter they named Margaret, who was fearless and bright, always asking questions and exploring everything. Then, 2 years later, another son named William, who was quieter and thoughtful, most like Wyatt in temperament. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Jackson proved to be as capable a rancher as Wyatt had believed, combining his father's traditional knowledge with new techniques he learned from Samuel and other progressive ranchers. By their 10th anniversary, they owned their land outright and were expanding their herd. Wyatt's school had become a permanent fixture in the community, meeting year-round in a dedicated building Jackson had built for her. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and literature to children from across the valley. Many of her former students went on to further education, something that filled her with immense pride. On their 15th anniversary, Jackson surprised Wyatt with a trip back to San Bernardino, just the two of them. Pearl and Samuel watched the children, insisting the couple needed time alone. They stayed in the same hotel where they had first pretended to be engaged, laughing at how much had changed. They rode out to the canyon where the flood had occurred, now peaceful and quiet. Standing at the edge, looking down at where Jackson had saved her, Wyatt felt overwhelmed by gratitude. "Everything good in my life started here," she said. "The moment you pulled me from that water, my whole world changed." Jackson wrapped his arm around her. "Mine too. I had given up on happiness, on meaning, on love. Then there you were, fighting for your life, and something inside me woke up. I had to save you, I had to know you, and knowing you saved me right back." They stood there for a long time, remembering that day and all the days since. The fear and desperation, the unexpected connection, the slow building of trust and love, the life they had created together. 15 years of marriage, 3 children, a thriving ranch and school, deep friendships, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we had not met?" Wyatt asked. "Sometimes," Jackson admitted, "and it terrifies me. I was so lost, Wyatt. Without you, I think I would have just kept drifting until I faded away completely. You gave me a reason to live, to work, to hope. You are my purpose, you and our children and the life we have built." "You are mine too," Wyatt said softly. "After my parents died, I thought I would never feel whole again. But you made me realize that wholeness does not mean going back to who you were. It means becoming someone new, someone shaped by both loss and love. We are not the broken people we were that day in the canyon. We are stronger, better, because we healed together." They returned to the ranch renewed and reconnected, ready to face whatever came next. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost Pearl to pneumonia when Wyatt was 38, a blow that devastated both families. But they rallied around Samuel and his children, becoming their support system, proving that family was not just blood but choice and commitment. Jackson's brother David eventually moved to California with his own family, settling near enough for regular visits. The Mills brothers, once separated by distance and divergent paths, rebuilt their relationship, their children growing up as close as siblings. Wyatt's school celebrated its 20th anniversary, and by then, some of her former students were sending their own children to learn from her. She had trained several assistant teachers, ensuring the school would continue even after she eventually retired. The little schoolhouse Jackson had built all those years ago had been replaced by a proper building with multiple rooms, funded by grateful families, and the community that had come to value education. The ranch grew into one of the most respected operations in the region. Jackson's reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing brought buyers from across California and beyond. He employed a dozen ranch hands year-round, treating them fairly and earning loyalty that lasted decades. But more than the material success, it was the love that defined their lives. Jackson never stopped courting Wyatt, bringing her flowers, stealing kisses when the children were not looking, telling her she was beautiful even when she insisted she was old and worn. Wyatt never stopped supporting Jackson's dreams, believing in him even when he doubted himself, reminding him of how far he had come from that empty drifter she had met in the flood. Their children grew into remarkable adults. James took over the ranch management, combining his father's skills with modern innovations. Margaret became a teacher like her mother, eventually running the school. William studied law like his uncle David, but returned to California to practice, wanting to stay near family. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and laughter again. Wyatt loved being a grandmother, spoiling the little ones and telling them stories about the old days. Jackson built swings and taught them to ride, his patience with children as infinite as ever. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a massive celebration. Children, grandchildren, old friends, former students, ranch hands past and present, all came together to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Speeches were made, toasts were raised, and Wyatt and Jackson danced together under the stars, just as they had at their wedding. 30 years, Wyatt marveled, her head on Jackson's shoulder as they swayed to the music. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you pulled me from that flood. Other times, I can barely remember life before you. I cannot remember wanting to, Jackson said. Life before you was not really living, just existing. You taught me the difference, showed me what it meant to have purpose and passion and love. They were in their 50s now, their hair graying and their faces lined, but their love had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened, matured into something richer than the intense attraction of their youth. They knew each other completely, the good and the difficult, and chose each other every single day. As they grew older, they began to slow down, letting their children take on more responsibility. Jackson still rode the ranch every morning but left the heavy work to younger men. Wyatt still taught but reduced her hours, training the next generation of teachers. They spent more time together, taking long walks, sitting on the porch watching sunsets, traveling occasionally to visit old friends. They marked their 40th anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their children, in the home they had built together. That evening, sitting on the porch swing Jackson had made decades ago, they reflected on their journey. "We have had a good life," Wyatt said contentedly. Better than I ever imagined possible when I was drowning in that flood. The best life, Jackson agreed. Not perfect, not always easy, but good, meaningful, full of love. Do you have any regrets? Wyatt asked. Jackson thought about this seriously. I regret that I cannot give you more years, that we are running out of time. But as for how we have spent our time, no regrets. Every choice, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow, they all led us here to this life, to this love. I would not change a thing. Wyatt squeezed his hand. Neither would I. Well, maybe I would have avoided that flood if I could, Jackson laughed. But then we would not have met. True. So maybe the flood was exactly what needed to happen, terrifying as it was. It brought me to you and you to me at the exact moment we both needed saving. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars they had watched together for 4 decades. Around them, the ranch they had built hummed with quiet activity. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. In the house behind them, Margaret was preparing dinner. James and William were discussing ranch business, and their various spouses were helping or chatting or tending to the youngest grandchildren. This was the legacy they had created, not just the land and buildings and cattle, but the family, the love, the community. 2 broken people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from their shared pain and hope. Jackson lived to see his 75th birthday, still sharp-minded though his body had grown frail. He spent his final months surrounded by family, holding Wyatt's hand, telling stories about the old days. When he spoke about the flood, about seeing Wyatt in the water and knowing he had to save her, his eyes still lit up with the certainty that it had been the most important moment of his life. I was so lost, he told their gathered family one evening. I had nothing to live for, no purpose, no hope. Then the flood came, and there she was, fighting so hard to survive. Pulling her out saved me as much as it saved her. She gave me back my life, gave me everything that mattered. Wyatt, sitting beside him, tears streaming down her face, squeezed his hand. You gave me life too. We saved each other, remember? That was always our story. Jackson died peacefully in his sleep a week later, Wyatt beside him. The entire community turned out for his funeral, testament to the impact he had made. He was remembered as a skilled rancher, a devoted husband and father, a fair employer, and a good man who had lived with integrity and love. Wyatt grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had loved Jackson for over 40 years, and his loss left a void nothing could fill. But she had also learned, long ago in the aftermath of her parents' deaths, that grief and gratitude could coexist. She was grateful for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. The pain of losing him was the price of having loved him so completely. She lived another 5 years, spending them surrounded by family, continuing to teach part-time, and writing down the story of her and Jackson's life for their descendants. She wanted them to know how 2 lost souls had found each other, how a flash flood had brought together 2 people who needed saving in different ways, how love could heal even the deepest wounds. On what would have been their 45th anniversary, Wyatt sat on the porch swing, alone but not lonely, remembering. She could almost feel Jackson beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his voice soft in her ear. The memories were so vivid, so precious, that death itself could not diminish them. We did it, she whispered to the evening air. We built a good life, raised wonderful children, loved each other well. You saved me from the flood, and I saved you from emptiness, and together we created something that will outlast us both. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, the school under Margaret's direction, both institutions testament to what Wyatt and Jackson had built. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the values they had instilled: hard work, kindness, education, family, and love. Wyatt died peacefully at 72, surrounded by 3 generations of descendants. Her last words were about Jackson, about the flood, about the moment that had changed everything. "He saved me," she whispered, smiling, "and now I get to see him again." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, dates, and a single line that told their story. 2 souls who saved each other. The spot became a family landmark, a place where descendants came to reflect, to connect with their history, to remember the flood that had brought together 2 broken people and created a legacy of love. The story of Wyatt and Jackson became family legend, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren who never knew them still heard about the flash flood, the drifting cowboy, the grieving young woman, and the love that had healed them both. It became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, that sometimes the worst circumstances led to the best outcomes, that love could indeed save a life. The ranch and school continued for generations, always carrying the marks of their founders' values and vision. The little town that had grown up around them prospered, and the Martin and Mills families remained integral to the community. Every year on the anniversary of that long-ago flood, the family gathered at Wyatt and Jackson's graves to remember and give thanks for the chance encounter that had started it all. In the end, Wyatt and Jackson's story was not just about survival or romance, though it contained both. It was about purpose and meaning, about 2 people finding in each other the reason to truly live again. Jackson had saved Wyatt from drowning in the flood, but she had saved him from drowning in emptiness and grief. Together, they had built a life of significance, raised a family of love, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their love story, born from disaster and desperation, had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. It proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that salvation can come from unexpected sources, and that 2 broken people, when they find each other at exactly the right moment, can create something whole and wonderful together. The flash flood that should have ended Wyatt's life instead gave her everything worth living for. And the drifting cowboy who had lost all sense of purpose found it again in the simple act of reaching into the water and pulling out the woman who would become his whole world. They saved each other, loved each other, and built a life that mattered, proving that even in the wild and dangerous landscape of the Old West, the greatest adventure was always love.